Hi, everybody. This is Rhonda Seelinger, and I am the Customer Engagement Manager for iClicker, and we hope you're having a great Valentine's Day. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to begin the presentation shortly, but before we get started, I do have a couple quick announcements. The first, and I'm sure you probably discovered this as you were logging in, but we do have everyone muted, and we do this just to keep out background noise, but we do hope to hear from you, so please use the chat box or the Q&A to share any feedback or questions, and we do monitor those throughout the presentation and promise to do our best to address them. Also, I do want to let you know that we are recording the webinar, and we will share a link to it shortly afterwards. And we also share our webinars at the iClicker.com website, and so you can see past webinars. You can also see future webinars that we're hosting throughout the spring, so we hope you can check that out. And with those things covered, I am very delighted to introduce Dr. Kate Biberdorf. She is an award-winning chemistry instructor at the University of Texas at Austin, and she also works with local schools to promote science education in her outreach program called Fun with Chemistry. And we are looking forward to hearing her presentation on active learning simplified. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Biberdorf.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Happy Valentine's Day. So what I want to do really quickly is just give you a little bit of background about me so you know who's talking to you. This is usually what I'm known for. I like to breathe fire. For those of you who are pyromaniacs like me, that's just cornstarch and a blowtorch. And of course, you need water afterwards because it's disgusting. But y'all will hear my Michigan accent come out when I get excited. But I live here in Texas and Austin, which I absolutely love. I'm a lecturer. I'm up for promotion. I find out on Friday if I get promoted, so please send me your good vibes if you're into that type of thing. And like what Rhonda was saying, I am also the Director of Demonstrations and Outreach, and so I have an outreach program called Fun with Chemistry, and what I do is I go out to local Austin schools and I blow stuff up, really just try to show kids that science is fun and entertaining, and you don't have to be a dork or a nerd to like science. You can just be a normal girl who likes fire and explosions. But I do want to put a quick disclaimer out here. Everything I'm about to say is just for me personally and how I personally perceive the best way to teach. I do not speak for the University of Texas, and the University of Texas is not formally endorsing anything. This is just me personally. So now that all the boring stuff's out of the way, let me kind of get into why I personally really like using iClicker and how I set the tone in my classroom. So like I said, I work at the University of Texas at Austin, and I'm a general chemistry instructor. And so our general format here at UT is the fall semester, your first semester, our students take Principles of Chemistry 1, so Gen Chem 1. And so for those of you who are used to the chemistry format, that's usually where we talk about quantum mechanics, we do some intermolecular forces, some bonding, some thermodynamics, and then in that second semester, the spring semester, that's where we jump into the difficult stuff. That's really our weeder class, as the students would call it. We don't call it that, but that's where we go into our acid-base chemistry, chemical equilibrium, some electrochemistry. This year we're even throwing inorganic in there, but that's what's also partnered with our lab. So our students do not take a lab for the first semester, but they do take a lab for the second semester. And I'm just trying to give you a little background so you know how we set up our course globally before we dive deeper into the actual class. So in my personal classroom, we use the hybrid format. We steer away from the word flipped, but you might recognize some of the things with that. But basically our hybrid format is we expect students to do work outside of the class. We expect for them to do what we call learning exercises. We use Canvas here at the University of Texas, and so all of our learning exercises are hosted on Canvas. Our students basically will do something. So they'll either read something, they'll do a simulation, they'll maybe watch a quick short video, but basically we do what we call learning exercises before they even step foot in my classroom. So if I'm doing a huge lecture on the application of enthalpy, I expect them to know what enthalpy is before they even walk into my class. During class, we use iClicker Cloud to do active learning, and that's really what the bulk of this conversation is going to be today, but I just want to again give you a heads up so you understand how we use this in our course. And then after class, we let our students use the Sapling homework system, the platform. I really love this system. They hire master's and PhD chemists and experts to actually use tailored responses. So if your student makes a mistake at home, they get a tailored response specific to that answer that they submitted. And then they get real-time feedback, which I just absolutely love. And as I was putting together these slides, I realized I'm a big fan of Macmillan Learning, so I got to give them a shout out. But like I said today, what we're going to be speaking about is the iClicker Cloud. And I just, again, I have to give credit to my peers. The entire course was set up by Cynthia LeBrake, Paul McCord, David Vanderbilt, and a little bit of David Lottie there, and I wouldn't be there without them. So I just need to say thanks. Okay, so how do I actually do this? So in the very beginning, we walk in. I have a little bit, and I'll talk about that in a second, how I set my tone. But I have a very formatted, structured course. And so basically, if I'm teaching a 50-minute course, there's going to be music ahead of time. We start with a quiz, then we go lecture, question, lecture, question, lecture, question, all the way through for that full 50 minutes. So let's start at the beginning. One of the most important things that I do is I set the tone in my classroom. So for those first 5 minutes when the students walk in the door, I am blasting music. It has nothing to do with the chemistry I'm teaching. It's maybe a Miley Cyrus song. After the Super Bowl, I played Justin Timberlake. Really anything. If my students did well on the exam, I played Queen, We Are the Champions. But anything to just get them engaged and excited. I also teach at 12:30 on Tuesday, Thursday. So they're just like dead after lunch. So for me, it's a way to kind of wake them up and get them moving. But right after that, I jump right into what I would consider a warm-up, where I tell them a story about my personal life, anything to humanize myself. So I teach for a classroom that has anywhere between 300 and 500 students in there. And so it can be an intimidating place for active learning. So anytime where I can kind of tell a story about how I tripped and fell, or how I accidentally joined a triathlon and then started competing in it because I'm competitive, anything that can kind of show that I'm a human really helps, at least I personally believe, helps set the tone in your classroom. So after you do the fun part, then you jump into what I call quizzes. And so I personally use iClicker to do my quizzes. When I have a quiz in my class, that's something where I'm grading on accuracy. It's the one and only time I grade on accuracy in my class. And so what I'm always saying to my students is you may use your notes, but not your neighbor. That meaning that if any notes you took on the learning exercises before you walked in the door, you may use that to help you answer these questions, but you may not use your voice. You may not talk to your neighbor that's next to you. You can't use anything online. You need to use your notes. And again, this is the only time I grade on accuracy. After that, we jump into more of a playful setting. And so this is where I do the mini lecture. So if I talked about what enthalpy was in the learning exercise here, now I'm going to be diving deeper into it. So what is enthalpy of formation? What's enthalpy of a reaction? What does standard enthalpy mean? And so I give a mini lecture and then I follow it up with a question. And so this is kind of an example of what my class will look like. I'm right there in the middle. You can barely see me there. And this is my current class. This happened about a week ago. So for this class, I'm teaching my second semester. I have about 380 students in that room. And this is what happens when I have a question. So I pose a question to them and they start talking to their neighbor. They're engaged. They're moving around. They're working. You can see all these kids moving around. You can also see people standing up and walking around. I'll talk about those in just a second. But at this point, I say you can use your external resources. If it's quiet, that freaks me out. I don't want it to be quiet in the room. Talk to your neighbor. If it's dead silent, I start throwing candy at them, just anything to get them to talk to each other. For these questions, everything is graded on participation. So if they click a button, they get credit. But I absolutely could not do this alone. Like I said, I have huge classes. Last semester, I had the biggest class I've ever had. It was 483 students. I would need what we call our PLAs, or Peer Learning Assistant Program. So here's a picture of them. This is entirely led by Dr. Stacy Sparks. She's fantastic. She does a great job with his kids. And so what these are students who are STEM majors, and they did incredibly well in our class. And so we've actually recruited them to come back and they walk through our class while we teach. So anytime I'm doing something with iClicker, my students are walking through. I have anywhere between 10 to 15, depending on my class size. These two down here in the front two, they were actually my students in the fall 14 and spring 15 class. They did so well. They were recruited to be my LAs the following year. And then the last 2 years, we've actually paid them to be our senior LAs, so they help guide the rest of them and shape them into good instructors. This one actually just got into farm school, so I'm super proud of her because I've been able to watch her for her whole journey, but that's not important. Moving on. Okay, so now the summary, basically how I use iClicker. If I say something's for quiz, it's accuracy, so if they get it right, they get the credit. If they get it wrong, they get no points. Questions is for participation. As long as they hit a button, I give them full credit, but I do want to point something out here. I never, ever, ever use this for attendance, and I get this question all the time, but with 500 students, I can't. I absolutely cannot track their attendance. I use iClicker to kind of pad their grade. 85% of their grade comes from exams, so I want to use Clicker as a way to build confidence, get them to engage in the lecture, to keep them active for the whole class, especially if I'm doing a Tuesday, Thursday lecture, which is 75 minutes. So I can't use it for attendance. It's not a good thing for me. I want this to be a positive thing for my students. And so this is just a personal thing. I don't do attendance. Okay, so day one, this is one of my biggest pieces of advice. It is worth the 5 minutes to actually register for Reef. I call it Reef, sorry guys, but it used to be Reef, now it's iClicker Cloud. But this is one of the most important times. If you can take 5 minutes to have your students actually register for Reef in the class, it's one of the best uses of your class time, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it. So what I have them do is I tell them about the syllabus, and then I get to the point where I talk about in-class learning. And so I tell them that we're going to be using iClicker Cloud or Reef. So I have them pull up Canvas, I have them click these buttons, and you literally hear me run around class yelling, click the gray button, click the gray button. And all my LAs are running around, my TAs, my specialists, everybody, were running around the classroom trying to help my students get registered for Reef. And what this basically does is it allows my Canvas gradebook to talk to the Reef gradebook. So it syncs the two grades together. And I think this is incredibly important because then I have one grade in my Canvas gradebook. I can just weight it at 5% of their overall grade, which is what we do here at UT, and then I don't ever have to think about it again. It's super, super simple for us. However, I will have those students that won't click the gray button, so at the end of the semester, they have a 0 for their Reef score or their Clicker score, and then they get upset. So what I've learned is that on day one, if you allow the students 5 minutes to download their stuff, we always have access codes because we bundle with Sapling and our course pack and everything, so there's always a little bit of things they have to click in there, either their unique number saying I'm in specifically in Biberdorf's 1230 class, and then they have to do their access code, which links them up to everything else. So I personally think it's very, very valuable to use those 5 minutes. But I also think there's something more to this that a lot of people will overlook. But if this is on your first day, if you're allowing your students to kind of poke around and make mistakes here, it's a very good time to set the tone. And so it's a great time for me and all of my LAs to walk around and show them that we're here to help, that we're experts, we like talking to them, we're nice people, we're kind, we laugh around, and I really, truly do everything I can to get my LAs to talk to my students during this time to try to start setting that bond so the students aren't even aware of the fact that they're getting quote unquote chemistry help. And again, this is just my opinion. Okay, so now what I want to do is tell you a little bit more about the teacher versus student perspective. And I just love this picture. As you can see, here's this little girl. She was like 5, 6 years old. She added some water to dry ice and her jaw dropped and she made this adorable noise. She was like, and I just knew in that moment I did something for her. I showed her a little bit of science. And so what I want to do is show you guys how you can use iClicker to get a college student to go, and I don't know if that's ever possible, but that's my goal for you. So, okay, so here's what I do. When I walk into the classroom, I plug everything in. I personally use OneNote where I run all of my slides on it, and then I use a Wacom tablet so I can annotate everything. And then I just run Clicker all over it. And so I open up this site. This is the first thing that shows up. I click this green button, and when you do, this little window pops up. I usually have it float right over here in the left-hand corner. That's just me personally. Then what I do is I click this polling button right here. And when you do that, this piece comes up. There are 4 different formats you can have for Clicker. We'll come back to that in a second. But then this bar comes up as well. Now, I'm someone who likes my space, and so this big feature right here, I'm not a big fan of it. So you can actually minimize it. If you do so, you'll get this floating bar right here. So again, this is just my personal technique. I love to have the floating bar right here in the left corner, and then I have the floating one for the format of your Clicker right here. So it's like a little T in the side of the corner of your slides, and nobody even notices it. It never gets in my way, but again, that's just what I like to do. All right, so now how do I personally do this? Well, I have a lot of different strategies, and here at the University of Texas, we all use different approaches for this. But the most common one is we actually pre-write our quiz and questions. And we do this, we commit to them before the semester even starts. We post them all together, we put them and print them into a course pack, so our students already know what the questions are. That being said, because my quizzes are with accuracy, I actually delete a lot of the information off them. I might leave them a table or a chart or something that they need to interpret, but they don't know what the actual question is, but we leave the slide there for that space. But my questions are predetermined. Now, some of my colleagues will actually make up questions on the fly in class. I'm so type A and anxious about teaching in front of 500 people that would never, ever work for me. I have to have this set up here. But another thing I do is because I don't do anything on attendance, I write things like this in this cell. So as you can see as students of this webinar, you don't know what this cell is. You don't know what I'm pointing at. You don't know what I'm looking at. You just know that I'm referencing this cell. And so that's one of my ways that I make it so that students have to be in class to participate because they don't know what this cell is unless they're there. So that's what that part is. Now, like I said, my quizzes are graded on accuracy. So for my students that picked B, that is the correct answer. So all 46% of them got 1 point. The rest of them did not get any points, even though 42% went over here. And this would obviously be a huge red flag for me, saying that the base knowledge that I expected them to walk into the classroom with, they don't have. Only 46% of them got where I was hoping them to get out of the learning exercise. So I would know immediately that I need to step back, address the definition, and then move forward. Okay, so now this is a super simple question, but I just wanted to show you how I do something with questions. So if it says question at the top right there, then this means that I grade just on participation. However, if you're in my class and I only have answer A and B and you submit C, D, or E, I refuse to give you credit for that. I just won't do that. I'm stubborn and it's just my own personal preference, but I refuse to. If my options are A or B, you must click one of the two. If you click C, D, or E, you get 0 points. You did not participate. You were not active in my class. So now what I want to do is just take a quick second and talk to you about the different question types. I've already showed you multiple choice. For multiple choice for iClicker, you can use 5 different options, so A, B, C, D, or E. If you go to F, that's not an option, so your students will immediately know that's not the right answer. But they also have some other cool formats that I want to show you really quickly. So there's short answer, numeric entry, and also you have your target question. So for short answer, they can submit anything that you would expect you could submit for short answer. So you can have letters, you can have numbers. I personally like this when I'm teaching nuclear chemistry, so you can see that they can put the mass number, the atomic number, you can also have the symbol in there. But something that is pretty nice is you can actually sort things by clicking response. So we'll put numbers in one area and letters in another one. For this specific question, I really like to do this when I think I'm going to get a bunch of different answers, because it's nice for the students to see how different people will be thinking, where their brain goes. Some people think there's a number, some people need you to have just an element symbol, and so it's great to ask a question and really show the students how people think of things differently and how they could submit different types of answers to one specific question, even though they all think they're answering the same thing. One word of caution though, be careful, because if you show your results to your students and actually show them what's going on, they could write anything and they could get creative. I always remind my students that I can see exactly what you submit. So if somebody types something that's inappropriate, the worst I've ever had was H-U-H, which really just clues me in that they don't know what's going on, so I'm okay with that. But I have had colleagues report that people have been inappropriate or offensive. Usually it has to do with a group of, and not to be terrible, but a group of boys that are together and they're trying to be funny or salty or something like that. So just be aware of it. Know that if you're going to show your results, you need to be ready to shut something down if students decide to be inappropriate 19-year-old kids. So. The second thing I want to show you is the format, which would be a numeric question. And so all you have to do is change that drop-down menu from multiple choice to numeric, and your students can enter a number of different things. I always ask my students to limit it to about 3 sig figs or 3 digits if you're not a science person, and that just works best for me. And what I love is that you can see exactly how many students submitted it and the percentage of students, and then you can go through and change up points if you decide to alter it. This is back about 2 years ago when I was giving 1 point for accuracy, 1 point for credit. But what I want to point out, and this is because I'm almost embarrassed by it, is for the longest time I would go through and click and click and click and find the answers. But I'm such an idiot. If you click the response button at the top, it organizes everything in numerical order. And I know that's silly to point out now in this day and age, but every time I do this presentation, I hear someone in the audience, well, when I do it live, I hear someone in the audience go, oh, so if that's you, just know you can do that. You can click response, it puts everything in order, and then boom, 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 you can select the right answer very quickly. And so this is just a shout out to iClicker. Y'all did a great update. I'm super happy about this. They've now added a column called the best column. And so I will go through and submit all the right answers or click all the right answers for my students. But I like telling them I was actually looking for 67.5 moles, or whatever unit it is that you're looking for. And so I think that's great that you can highlight the best answer. If for some reason your students do not come up with the best answer, you can actually come down here, click this, select the little star right here, and then type it in. I've never had that happen because I'm in an intro class, but I bet if you teach a very difficult, challenging thermodynamics, quantum mechanics class, I'm sure that would happen. Okay, so now target is one that intimidated me for a long time, and it took me about a year to actually use it, but now that I use it, I'm obsessed with it. I think it's one of the coolest ones. It's really fun, and it allows your students to it just changes up the format, which I think is great in the general chemistry classroom. And so I actually stole this from my colleague, Paul McCord, because his graphs are just prettier than mine. But basically the question is, when does a particle act most like an ideal gas? And that's just when it has a compressibility factor of 1. So you're just looking for the students to click this spot right here. Very, very easy question if they paid attention at all. But what I like about this is this is the grade response slide. And so what you can see is a lot of students click the origin, some click the spot down here of the lowest piece, and then someone who was way over here, they probably just guessed. But you can really see exactly where your students click. And so you just highlight the little square, and then it pops right here, grades everything. Anybody who submitted an answer within that square gets full credit. Anybody with without does not. They get the incorrect. I would encourage you to be a little bit kind. I'm a little bit generous on this one. Remember that some students don't have the best hand-eye coordination, and then some students get really nervous when they have to click something, so sweaty palms don't necessarily get the most accurate values. So just kind of widen your range just a little bit. If the correct answer is right here, make your box just a little bigger. That's my only advice there. So then the number one question I get every single time I do this seminar is, how do you know when to move on? If you're in an active learning classroom with 500 students, how do you know to move on? And I go to my my life as a fitness instructor when I was a graduate student trying to get my PhD. And so the rule when you're a fitness instructor is it's called an 80% rule. So if you're doing some really complicated, I was a kickboxing instructor, so if you're doing a hard kickboxing routine or choreography, if 80% or more of your class is with you, you keep going on. You move on, you add the next punch, the kick, whatever. If you're less than 80%, then you need to stop and bring the rest of your group up to it. You need to refresh some choreography, review something, you know, go over the punch, punch, kick, kick steps, whatever. So same thing in chemistry. If I get my results and I see that 74% of my students are with me, that's not enough. I can't just move on. So if my students, if 80% of them are with me, then I will just, you know, do a very quick explanation and move on for the rest of the lecture. But if it's less than 80%, I stop. I slow myself down. You can always tell, you can already tell that I speak really quickly, but I slow myself down and I actually work out the problem slowly and articulately on the slides because, like I said, I annotate. So that's just my personal preference. I think the 80% rule is great advice. Again, you can always steer away from it if you see some weird responses or anything, but that's just, I like the 80% rule. Immediately after you're done with lecture, I highly encourage you to go right to your session history. And so you click on your most recent session and you load it up. So you can see here that I've graded all of mine. And again, this was from last semester, but I've graded all of them at this point. But if you just run a session, this will be open. It's a question mark or a dash, something like that. And you click this, and what will happen is you get this window right here. And you can actually go through it and question by question by question, grade them. I personally like to grade them in class, but that's just me. But if that's too much for you, you can grade them afterwards. What I really want to highlight here is there's a delete button right here in the left corner. And the thing that I think is incredible about this is I actually use Clicker more than just an in-class polling device. And so what I like to do is if I draw something on my screen, my slide, or if I provide new data, I like to a lot of times use Clicker to send that image to the student so they can pull it up, look at the graph right in their face, and I just tell them I'm going to delete the slide later. Don't worry about this question. Obviously, I'm on pre-meds, pre-dentals. They always click something because they're terrified I'm going to grade them for it. But it's a great way to just in real time send your students data or a graph or anything like that. And I just really love that feature. All right, so now I quickly want to talk about the student perspective. This is Henry. I was doing a show for NBC Nightly News, and I was so scared because all the TVs are on me, and he's standing, he was moving around, but he had a great time learning, and I was so scared he was going to knock this over or my tank of liquid nitrogen, but he didn't. But I just want to show you from the student perspective what this can actually be like. So if they open up their app, what they'll see is you're going to see your course name and everything under. I'm terrible at Photoshop, so you're just going to see what I've cropped over and over and over again. But essentially what your student would see is a course for every single class they have. So the Biberdorf, the McCord, the Sparks, whatever, you know, they see which one, they click on your class and they move in. Then what they can do is they can review the day's work. And so here's a question from last semester where it was a very simple question. What unit should be used for mass in this equation? So the correct answer is kilograms per mole, D. But here you can see that a student clicked A. So they clicked the wrong answer for this specific equation. So what I love though is they can actually open up the results and they can see where they stand. So if they clicked A, they were with 10% of their peers, but the correct answer was D, but only 34% of their peers got it right. So yes, it's a way for them to get real-time feedback, but they can also check themselves. Like, am I at the right spot? Am I with my peers? No, I'm actually behind my peers, but a lot of my peers thought it was C. At least I didn't click C. You know, so they can talk their way through this, but I really think that it keeps them accountable, and I think it's a great thing that the students have access to the results after class. So I think that one thing that's great about any type of polling device is it really facilitates the think, pair, share philosophy. And so I don't want to waste your time with this because I know a lot of people are familiar with it, but basically what you do is you ask your students a question, you make them think about it, present an answer. Then you show them the results if you use Clicker, pair them up together, make them talk about it, and then have them share again. So let me walk you through how I personally use Clicker to do that. So back to this question that I showed you originally. So in this cell, what's the anode, what's the cathode? They think, they submit an answer. So then I get all the answers and I'm like, whoa, guys, look at what I got. 46% of you think B, 42% of you think E, you know, what's up? So I say, go, pair, talk to your neighbor. And so they talk to each other. And my biggest thing that I always say is convince your neighbor. Convince your neighbor you're right. And what's lovely is then after they've shared, I've asked them to commit their answer again. So they submit it again personally. Every single person has to submit their own answer again. And what's great is you can can see a new result. Now, sometimes you don't get the right thing. So this is what happened in my class, is all of them convinced each other that E was the correct answer when in fact B is the correct answer. And this is great because if you pick questions that have common misconceptions, which happens all the time in STEM, if there's common misconception questions, you can actually immediately address the issue, make the student accountable, and if you use William James' theory of emotional memory, if you make them like engage, have an emotional reaction, they're more likely to actually remember what you're talking to them about. So I think any type of misconceptions that you can address using iClicker is one of the best teaching tools you possibly could do. So here's just a couple pieces of advice as I end this webinar. The first thing is that I think one of the best things you could possibly do is on the first day, A, have them register for REEF right there on that first day, but B, use a different format. So ask them, what's your favorite element, and have them type in the symbol. Ask them, how old they are, or whatever questions you want to do, but get them comfortable with the formats when they know it's a low cost situation. I personally do not count clicker points for the second or third class day. Here at UT, they have up till 12 days to basically finalize their schedule. So if I have kids popping in and out on day 3 and I'm counting points and they miss 2 days, it's just a huge headache for me. And with 500 students, even if only 10% of those kids are moving, that's 50 kids that I have to deal with their clicker points. So I personally just wait till the second or third class day. I have a lot of pre-meds in my class, so grade each session immediately after class. It just helps with the headaches. They want to know exactly what they got right, what they got wrong, and for me, I've just learned that it's easier for my students if I do it right away. Now, here's the thing. This is an online device. Sometimes the internet malfunctions. Sometimes the Wi-Fi at your university is not great. Sometimes, some train runs into your school and now the Wi-Fi is down for a week. I mean, I have no idea what happens, but sometimes these things happen. And so what we do is we just build in 5 days of drops. And so I tell my students I drop approximately 5 days of points because sometimes I ask them 5 questions in a class, sometimes 1, sometimes 10. The most I've ever done, I think, was 14 or 15, way too many, but it was a good learning. It was a review session before the final, so it actually worked well. But for a normal class, it'd be way too much. So my big piece of advice here is make sure you drop some days of clicker points, and that way you can just completely avoid any stress when the internet malfunctions. Now, why do I use iClicker? Again, this is my personal preference. This is not what the university is endorsing, but I think iClicker is great. It's ready to go. You don't have to import your questions into a polling platform. I've used other systems where you have to type your questions in ahead of time, and then you have to code them. And then on the bottom of your slide, you have to code those. So then when you're in front of 500 students, you have to pick up your slide, then pick up something else, and then code them together, and then your thing is active. And for me, like I said, I'm type A, and I'm very, very uptight about things in my classroom, and that stresses me out. I cannot do it. It's way too much for me. What I love about Clicker is I click the button, I walked you through it. It's click, 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 done, and it's ready to go. I don't have to stress out at all. I just click the little play button, and I have no more problems for the rest of the semester, or the course, I should say. Your students can use either a smart device or a laptop. So that's a phone, a tablet, a laptop, a desktop. If they choose to bring that to class, they could use whatever they want, and I love that. That's so, so easy. Also, Clicker has hard remotes where you can do that. I personally don't use the hard remotes because I think the students tend to forget that at home. And it's just something that I like to avoid because they always have their cell phone on them, especially in this day and age. Like I mentioned before, you can actually use iClicker to send your students your slides in real time. I love when I can add data or a graph or something that was in the news last week when I was teaching my chemistry for non-majors course. It was awesome because that whole thing with Volkswagen went down where they were lying about their carbon dioxide emissions and blah, blah, blah. But basically, I was able to use all this data and show my students in real time, just shove it out to their phones, and they could look at it, and their reactions were so incredible because we were talking about the real-world application of the material that was right there on their phones. They could analyze it, and I just loved it. It was a really good teaching moment for me, and it was one of my favorite classes I've ever been able to do. And this last one, take with a grain of salt, because I primarily teach undergraduate students, primarily freshmen. It's an introductory course to chemistry, but at the end of the semester, after 2 semesters, when I poll them and I say, here are all the different devices you could possibly using for in-class polling systems, which do you prefer? And always we get huge responses for iClicker. That being said, they're 18. I don't know how many different devices they've actually been exposed to, and you always like what you're comfortable with and what you're used to. So whether or not that's like real science data, I'm not sure, but it's good enough for me to use it every semester, and I absolutely love Clicker, which is why it's my favorite one, and I've been using it for years. The last thing I want to say is if you guys have any questions for me, please do not hesitate to reach out. Like I said, my name is Kate Biberdorf. There's my email address. If you want to follow any of my kooky stuff I do with Chemistry Explosions, you can check me out at Fun with Chem. I'm either on Twitter or Instagram, or on Facebook, it's UT Fun with Chem. My personal website is katethechemist.com. And last but not least, happy Valentine's Day, y'all. I hope you had a good time. Please do not hesitate to ask any questions. And Rhonda, I'm going to throw it back to you. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, there is a question. And I'm not sure I'm interpreting this correctly, but I think there's just some confusion about what's a question versus a quiz and how do you use each one.
Sure. So basically what I do, and this is my personal technique, but with iClicker, I like to open up the system and then I just run one system the whole way through. So Clicker technically has one that says either polling or quizzing, but I like to use polling because I always forget to switch over. And if my slide, my actual slide says the word quiz, so if right here it says quiz, then my students know they can't talk to each other and they have to grade everything, and I will grade everything based on accuracy. If it says question right here, then my students know that they can use any type of resources they want, including their neighbor, including their internet. And as long as they hit a button, I grade that based on participation. So if they click a button, they get full credit. And this is just my teaching method. I know that Clicker has two different options. You can use quizzing and polling, but I always forget to close quizzing and then open polling during the lecture. So it's just easier for me to use polling the whole way through. I hope that answered it.
If not, if you want to type more into it, I'm happy to read it. I hope I was interpreting it correctly. I do have another question, and that is, do you embed your iClicker questions into PowerPoint?
I do, yes. And so I make everything out of PowerPoint, and my Clicker questions are just a complete slide on the PowerPoint. Then what I do before class is I actually export the entire PowerPoint slide lecture into OneNote, so it's one big section, and then I roll through the section and annotate, so I have a lot of space on there. I'm happy to show you that if you have a second. Give me just 1 second here, guys.
Sure.
So here's like my lecture for tomorrow. I have it, basically I have PowerPoint, I've put it right into the OneNote, and here's just what I'm going to walk through. Here's the lecture from yesterday, where I went through and I've actually added different notes to it. And so let me see if I can find a quiz somewhere. Hold on 1 second. Somewhere. There we go. So when it says question right here, my students know that they can ask, that they can talk to anything. They put it right there. But right at the very beginning of my lectures, I always have a quiz and they have to answer some type of question right there. So hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, I do want to note that you don't have to embed it already into a PowerPoint. You can ask questions on the fly. You don't have to do it. I mean, anything that's on your screen can be turned into a question, essentially. So you're not limited to like having to import things into a certain question type or system, proprietary system, if that makes sense. Yeah.
And I do that on the fly all the time too. So if somebody will say something in class that triggers another question, I'll just write something on the chalkboard and just type A, B, C, or have them submit a number. One of my colleagues actually does his entire lecture on Photoshop because he's amazing. I don't know how he does that, but I can't do it. But he just does everything, writes his questions right in there, pushes Clicker, and then boom, it shows every student exactly what he has in Photoshop, what he's drawn for them.
Okay, there's another question. I think it pertains to the quizzing versus the questioning thing. Do they know ahead of time that it's a quiz? I think you said you build that into your lectures every day.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's correct. Absolutely. My students know ahead of time. It literally says the word quiz on the top of the slide. And if it says the word quiz, they just know that is accuracy. And it's always at the top of my lecture. It's right at the beginning. After that, for the rest of the lecture, it will say question on the top, and then they can click right into it.
Great. And students have to bring a device, laptop, smartphone, or iPad?
Correct.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And you had mentioned that you drop 5 scores. And are those, like, do you get to choose those? Does the student get to choose which ones they are?
I do. Great question. I'm sure they would love to. So what I do, because like I said, I do so many different questions. I'll do 2 on one day, 9 on another. It's just not fair to say, like, I'm going to drop this one day. So I add up all the points at the end of the semester, and usually I end up dropping about 10% of the points. That's what 5 is about. But if that doesn't seem fair, if we had a lot of internet malfunction, malfunctions, I'll dip lower into that. If that seems outrageous where all my students have 100%, then maybe I'll go a little bit higher. But usually it's about 10% drop. Please don't tell my students that, because 5 days makes them happier for whatever reason.
All right. I think that is all of the questions I see. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah. I think that's all the questions I see for now. So perfect. Well, thank you so much, Kate. I really appreciate this. And we also want to thank everybody who attended. We appreciate your time, and you're welcome to follow up with us as well. And if you have any questions, definitely reach out to your iClicker local representative, or we have a great support site online at iClicker.com as well. All right. Well, I hope you guys have a great Valentine's Day, and thanks again.
Thank you.